I've got good news and I've got bad news. Good news is that fraction operations aren't really that tough. Bad news is you pretty much have to know them. No matter how good you are with your graphing calculator, there are times, particularly when we have variables involved, that you just need to know how this goes. So let's look at multiplication first. Let's say we have 1/2 times 2/3. The biggest mistake I see on fraction operations across all four operations is that people think you need to cross multiply whenever you multiply fractions. You only ever cross multiply when two fractions are equal to each other. The rest of the time you just multiply straight across. And in this case you'll get 2/6, which is 1/3. It kind of makes sense, right? Half of 1/3, or excuse me, half of 2/3 is 1/3. Division becomes multiplication as well. We have 1/2 divided by 2/3, or like you'd most likely see on the ACT, 1/2 over 2/3, fraction over fraction. We just flip the second fraction and multiply. So we take the reciprocal, and then we multiply. So this becomes 1/2 times 3/2, 3/4. And the same thing down here. 1/2 times 3/2 is equal to 3/4. Now you'll notice that 3/4 is bigger than what we started with, 1/2. And that's always going to be the case whenever we have something that we're dividing by a fraction that's between 0 and 1. So when we divide by a fraction that's between 0 and 1, our quotient, our result, is going to be bigger than the number we started with. Let's talk addition and subtraction. As you already know, addition and subtraction is a little more involved than multiplication and division because you have to have the common denominator. So 1/2 plus 2/3. So easiest way to find a common denominator is just to multiply the denominators together. Sometimes you can just eyeball it, of course, but this always works. You don't need to be overly concerned with finding the lowest common denominator. When I multiply 2 by 3 to get the common denominator, 6, I have to make sure I multiply the same thing on the top and on the bottom. Because if I don't, I'm actually going to change 1/2. It will no longer be 1/2. And I want to keep it 1/2. I just need to change the format it's in, change the denominator. So I have to multiply by 1 in the form of 3/3. Again, multiply straight across. I'm going to get 3/6. Same thing on here, except this time I'm going to multiply by 2. And that's 2/2, and that's 4/6. Now I can add these two together. 3/6 plus 4/6 is 7/6, or 1 1/6. Now, if we were subtracting, it would work the same way, except we'd end up with negative 1/6. We'd find the common denominator, then execute the operation. Let's look at an ACT example. This one's not in the bottom of your screen, but we'll talk about it. James bikes 6 5/6 miles in one day. The next day he bikes 10 4/9 miles. How many miles does he bike in total? First job on this is to realize this is an addition problem. Usually total is addition. And that's what we have here. How much he biked the first day plus how much he biked the second. Now, this is actually a pretty manageable problem in a calculator. You could enter 10 plus 5 divided by 6 in parentheses plus 6 plus 5/6 in parentheses plus 10 plus 4/9 in parentheses. Get a decimal out, convert that to a fraction using the math menu. You could alternatively just enter the fractions through the math menu and add them. Frankly, I think it's just as easy to solve it the long way. Now, here's a trick. Ignore the integers for right now. So you could, of course, make this into, you could say, well, 10 times 9 is 90, plus 4 is 94/9, and make them into improper fractions. I wouldn't do that because that's a pain, especially when it comes time to reduce them at the end. What I would do instead is just pretend these don't exist for a minute. Now I'm looking at a simpler problem, 5 over 6 plus 4 over 9. I'm going to find a common denominator. Now I could multiply these together, right? You could say 54. But I think you can eyeball it and see that 18 is going to be easier to work with. And it's actually the lowest common denominator here. Just a little multiple stuff. So to get to 18 with this 5, 6, I multiply by 3 over 3. And I'm going to get 15 over 18. Multiply by 2 over 2. I'm going to get 8 over 18. And I can add these together, 23 over 18. And that's going to reduce to 1 and 5/18. Now I need to add these back in. 6 plus 1 is 7. 10 plus 7 is 17. So my final answer is 17 and 5/18. That's all there is to that. Now, these are all really important and you absolutely need to know, particularly for algebra problems later. But probably the most useful skill is cross-multiplying. And that's covered in the next video, cross-multiplying in linear equations using fractions.